My family refused to help me with my business because they invested in my cousin. Now that he failed and my company is successful, they call my company the family business. I'm Zachary, 34 years old. I'm a man who grew up in a pretty comfortable family. My dad owns several businesses around the city, real estate, retail, and a few others. My mom owns several apartment buildings, yes, plural. My grandparents, though not super rich, were the first entrepreneurs in the family. They built enough success to give my parents their initial boost. In my family, there's this unspoken rule: if you're born into it, you either inherit something and don't screw it up, or you build your own empire. Naturally, I went for the latter. Ever since I was a teenager, I was fascinated by how things worked, not just machines, but systems, networks, and security. When I was 14, I accidentally hacked into my school's system just to erase a few detention records. I didn't even do it for malicious reasons, I just wanted to see if I could. That moment flipped a switch in my brain. From then on, I was hooked. While other kids played games, I was reading about firewalls, encryption, and vulnerabilities. I didn't just want to use computers, I wanted to understand how to protect them. It wasn't about power, it was about solving puzzles no one else could. Years later, I studied computer science. I worked my way through university doing small IT jobs, cleaning malware off old PCs, repairing software, and tutoring freshmen for pocket money. I graduated exhausted but proud. Cybersecurity wasn't just my interest anymore, it was my identity. So, I made a plan. A detailed, structured, realistic plan for a cybersecurity firm. I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel, just to create a small, specialized service for local companies that couldn't afford the big-name firms but desperately needed protection from data breaches and ransomware. I worked on my business plan for months. I had cost estimates, potential clients, and even a draft for how I'd reinvest profits. I was ready. I wasn't asking for charity, just a small investment or a family loan. One Saturday morning, I invited my parents to sit down with me. I had printed copies of my plan, prepared slides, even made projections using market data. My hands were shaking, but I was proud. I explained everything: the demand for cybersecurity, the gaps in the market, and the possible growth. I told them I didn't need millions, I just needed enough to rent a small office, buy hardware, and pay 1 or 2 salaries until we got off the ground. My dad stayed silent for most of it. My mom smiled politely, that soft kind of smile people give when they're waiting for you to stop talking. When I finished, my dad leaned back and said, "Son, being a good programmer doesn't make you a good businessman." I felt my stomach drop. He said I didn't have the spark, that I was too idealistic. That investing in me wasn't an investment, it was a handout I'd never return. He told me to get some experience working under someone else first. My mom added, "Your cousin Bernard has been talking to us about his new hotel business. You should talk to him, maybe he can show you how it's done." I nodded, smiled out of reflex, and left. But inside, I felt humiliated. It wasn't the money I cared about, it was the message: we don't believe in you. A few weeks later, Bernard got married. My parents went all out for the wedding: huge venue, hundreds of guests, live band, open bar. I didn't want to go, but family pressure made it impossible to skip. During the reception, I overheard Bernard thanking my dad for helping him get the hotel off the ground. My heart stopped. Wait, what? They had just told me they couldn't risk investing in me. Yet they handed Bernard, a guy with no real experience, no degree, and a history of jumping from one business idea to another, a huge sum for his hotel. I smiled through the night, congratulated him, and left early. When I got home, I sat in my car for a long time. Not angry, just hollow. It wasn't about money anymore, it was about faith. About how, when I looked at them, I realized they didn't see me as capable. The next day, my grandmother called and asked why I'd left the wedding so early. I told her the truth, everything. She didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, she said something that I'll never forget. "Zachary, your father sees himself in Bernard because they're similar. But that doesn't mean you don't have potential. You're just different. Different isn't bad, it's just harder for people to recognize." The next morning, my grandfather called. He's not the type of man who talks much. He said, "Come by the house." When I got there, he was sitting at the table with his old checkbook. He said, "Your grandmother told me what happened." Then he wrote me a check. Not enough to make me rich, but enough to start. Enough to matter. "This isn't a gift," he said. "It's a seed. Someone once believed in me when no one else did. I'm doing the same for you." I can't explain what that moment meant to me. It wasn't just money, it was validation. It was someone saying, "I see you." I promised him I wouldn't waste it. With that money, I rented a small office with my two closest friends, Adam and Luis. We couldn't afford furniture, so we used second-hand desks and folding chairs. We shared one old coffee maker and lived off instant noodles. We worked insane hours, 14, sometimes 16 hours a day. We didn't have clients at first, but we built demos, did free work for small local businesses, and slowly built a reputation. Then one day, we got a call from a mid-sized financial company that had just been hacked. We stayed up for 3 nights straight fixing their systems. When we finished, they paid us well and signed a maintenance contract. That single job changed everything. With time, we expanded. We hired more people. We built something real. And when I finally paid my grandparents back, with interest, my grandfather hugged me and said, "Told you that seed would grow." I'll never forget the look in his eyes that day. While my company was growing, Bernard's hotel started falling apart. Bad management, overspending, poor reviews. Then the pandemic hit, and it collapsed completely. My parents poured money into it trying to save him, but it was like bailing water from a sinking ship. I felt bad for him, genuinely. But a part of me couldn't ignore the irony. A few years later, my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary came around. They were the reason I even existed in business, so I decided to make it special. I rented a ballroom, paid for everything, and made sure they felt honored. Everyone came, relatives, old family friends, even my parents. At one point, I overheard my dad telling someone how his guidance and his support helped me get on the right path. He even called my company the family business. I nearly dropped my glass. Throughout the night, I caught him repeating that same story, painting himself as the wise father who guided his son into success. It burned. When it was time for speeches, I had originally planned to keep it simple, talk about love, legacy, and how they'd inspired all of us. But standing there, looking at them, I couldn't stay silent. So I said, "My grandparents didn't just build a marriage, they built a foundation of trust. When everyone else doubted me, they believed in me. The company I built exists because they opened a door for me when every other one was closed." The room went silent. My grandparents smiled with pride. My parents didn't. 15 minutes later, my dad confronted me near the dessert table. His face was red. "Were you trying to humiliate us in front of everyone?" "No," I said. "I just told the truth." He called me ungrateful. I lost it. Ungrateful? You gave Bernard money for his hotel, twice, and told me I wasn't the business type. Now that I've made it, suddenly you're proud. Everyone nearby went quiet. My mom tried to calm things down, but it was too late. I left. That night, sitting in my car again, I felt the same hollow ache I did years ago. Except this time, I wasn't the one who needed validation anymore. The next morning, my grandmother texted me. "Zachary, we love you. Don't feel bad. We understand." But I did feel bad. Because it wasn't supposed to be about me. It was supposed to be about them. Update 1. I thought things would calm down after the anniversary. I was wrong. A few days later, one of my cousins texted me out of nowhere. "Hey, is it true you manipulated your grandparents into giving you money for your company?" I just stared at the message for a full minute. Manipulated? Apparently, that's what my dad was telling people, that I had emotionally blackmailed my grandparents, that I took advantage of their kindness. Then an aunt messaged me on Facebook, saying she was disappointed in how I used family sentimentality for personal gain. I called my grandmother immediately. She told me not to worry, that she knew the truth and that people liked to gossip. But I could hear it in her voice, she was tired. She didn't deserve to be dragged into this. So I called my mom. She answered in that tone, half defensive, half condescending. "You shouldn't be making a big deal out of this," she said. "Your father just told people the truth. You cried to your grandparents until they felt sorry for you. That's manipulation." I froze. "That's called being human," I said quietly. I heard my dad shouting in the background, "Everyone sees you for who you really are now." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe how far they'd twisted it. "If that's what you need to believe to feel better, go ahead," I said, and hung up. I blocked them on every platform. I was done being the family's villain just because I succeeded without their help. The following weeks were silent, at least on the surface. But I started hearing from old family friends that my dad had been telling people he built the foundation I stood on. Others said he claimed he had loaned me money. Lies. It got to the point where clients who knew my parents started asking questions. I realized that if I didn't draw a line, this would keep poisoning everything I'd worked for. So I made a decision. I wouldn't go to family events anymore. Not birthdays, not holidays, not reunions. If my parents were there, I wasn't. It hurt, but it was peaceful. I focused on work. My company kept growing. We started working with international clients, and I finally opened our second office. But I still felt that small, aching guilt, the one that whispered, "You shouldn't have said what you said at the anniversary." Not because it wasn't true, but because it started a war I hadn't meant to start. Update 2. A year and a half later, I got a call from my mom early in the morning. I almost didn't answer. When I did, she was crying. "It's your grandfather," she said. "He passed away in his sleep last night." Everything around me stopped. He was gone. The man who had believed in me when no one else did, gone just like that. I drove straight to my grandmother's house. She looked fragile, smaller somehow, but when she saw me, she smiled. That same warm, patient smile she always had. We hugged for a long time. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. The funeral was beautiful, simple, elegant, filled with people who respected him. Old business partners, neighbors, even former employees came to say goodbye. During my eulogy, I barely made it through the last paragraph. My grandmother held my hand the whole time. When I sat down, I saw my dad staring at me. His expression was unreadable, not anger, not sadness. Just, something heavy. After the burial, the family gathered at my grandmother's house. Everyone was quiet, exhausted, grieving. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. Then came the will. My grandfather wasn't a millionaire, but he'd built a decent estate, properties, savings, some investments. When the lawyer read that the lake house, his pride and joy, would be split between me and my cousin Laura, the room tensed instantly. My dad's head snapped toward me. He didn't say anything, but his jaw clenched so tight I thought he'd break a tooth. Laura, bless her heart, was shocked too, she hadn't expected it. But she smiled and said, "He always said we were the two who visited him the most." After everyone left, my grandmother told me. "He wanted you to have something that reminded you of peace. He knew how much you loved that lake." He wanted you to have a piece of what he loved most. I cried in her kitchen like a child. For a few months, things were quiet again. I spent weekends at the lake house fixing it up. It was old, but beautiful. The kind of place that made you forget about the rest of the world. Then my dad started calling. First politely, then aggressively. That house should have been mine. Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly. You manipulated him. I hung up every time. Then came the legal letter. He was suing me, claiming that I had pressured my grandfather into changing the will. It was surreal. I thought it was some kind of bluff until my lawyer confirmed it was real. I called my mom, hoping maybe she'd be the voice of reason. He's grieving, she said. Just give him the house. It's not worth all this fighting. I couldn't believe it. It's not about a house, I said. It's about respect. She sighed, said I was just like him, and hung up. The lawsuit dragged on for months. My dad's lawyer was ruthless, filing delay after delay, trying to wear me down. He underestimated how stubborn I could be. My grandmother testified on my behalf. She told the court exactly what my grandfather had said, that he wanted me to have the house because I earned it, because I reminded him of himself when he was young, determined, hardworking, and maybe a little too proud. My dad didn't have a single piece of evidence. Nothing. When the judge ruled in my favor, my lawyer smiled and whispered, "He's going to regret this." And he did. Because I filed a defamation countersuit. It wasn't about revenge, it was about setting the record straight. My dad had told people I manipulated a dying old man for money. That wasn't just an insult, it was a stain on my reputation, and it was starting to affect my company. It took another half a year, but I won that too. The damages he had to pay were brutal. Between his own legal costs and mine, he lost more than he could handle. He had to sell his house. Then parts of his business. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Because the truth is, there's no real winning when it's your own father on the other side of the courtroom. That night, my grandmother called me again. Her voice was calm but sad. Your grandfather would be proud of how you stood your ground, she said. But he'd also remind you that peace is worth more than being right. I cried again. Update 3. It's been almost 2 years since the court case ended. I thought time would heal things, that maybe, after all the chaos, there'd be some quiet reconciliation. But life doesn't always give you that kind of closure. My dad and I haven't spoken since the verdict. Not a word. He didn't even show up at Christmas that year. My mom came alone, said he didn't feel well. I didn't ask questions. I think we both knew the truth, he couldn't stand being in the same room as me. At first, I told myself I didn't care. I focused on work, on friends, on building something that mattered. I kept telling myself I'd already chosen peace by cutting them off. But peace isn't just silence. Sometimes it's the sound of things you'll never get to say. One night, a few months ago, I was at the lake house, my grandfather's house, sitting on the old dock, watching the reflection of the moon ripple on the water. It was quiet except for the crickets and the soft sound of waves against the wood. And out of nowhere, I started crying. Like, ugly crying. Not because of guilt or anger, but because I realized something I'd refused to admit for years. I still wanted my dad to be proud of me. I wanted to hear him say, "You did good, son." Even if he didn't mean it. Even once. It hit me hard, this childish longing for approval from someone who never learned how to give it. My therapist once told me, some people love you the best way they know how, and sometimes that way is broken. I think that's my dad. He grew up with nothing. Fought his whole life to be respected. And then I came along, younger, more educated, doing things differently. He probably saw my independence not as success, but as rejection. I don't excuse what he did, but I understand where it came from now. A few weeks later, my mom called again. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. Her voice was shaking. "Your father's in the hospital," she said. "He had a stroke." Time froze. I drove there immediately. When I walked into the room, he looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. The man who once filled every space with his voice now just stared out the window, silent. He turned his head slowly when he heard me. His eyes softened for a moment, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. I stood there, unsure whether to approach or walk away. Then I sat beside him. No words. Just, quiet. After a few minutes, he reached out his hand, trembling, hesitant, and I took it. He didn't speak. The stroke had affected his speech, but the look in his eyes said enough. Regret. Exhaustion. Maybe even love. I told him everything I hadn't been able to say for years. That I wasn't angry anymore. That I never wanted to win against him. That I just wanted him to see me for who I really was, not his rival, not his mistake, but his son. He started to cry. It broke me. He's home now, recovering. We don't talk much, words are hard for him, but sometimes that's okay. We sit in silence, and for the first time, that silence feels like peace instead of punishment. I still visit my grandmother every Sunday. We have coffee, talk about the old days, about my grandfather's stubbornness and how much he would have loved to see me finally take care of the lake house. Last week, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "You've been through hell, but you came out with your heart intact. That's rare." And maybe she's right. Final update. I went back to the lake last weekend. It was cold, the kind of cold that makes the air feel clean. I sat on the dock again, this time with my dad's old jacket, the one I swore I'd never wear. It still smelled faintly like motor oil and cigarettes. I thought about everything, the fights, the lawsuits, the distance, the years wasted trying to prove something. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel the need to be right. I just felt free. The truth is, forgiveness doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it's just choosing not to carry the weight anymore. I'll never forget what happened, and I'll never pretend it didn't hurt. But I can let it stop defining me. Because at the end of the day, I didn't need to destroy my father to become my own man. I just needed to stop trying to make him understand. I'm still here. Still building. Still learning how to love without bitterness. And when I look at the water now, I finally see what my grandfather meant when he said, "Peace is the quiet after the storm, not before it."